Hello and welcome. I am John Minnick, the Special Projects Manager at Reagan Communications and PR Daily. I'm thrilled to welcome all of you to Learn from the Past, Prepare for the Future, Internal Communications in 2025, in partnership with Polite Mail. Now, before we get started with our program, some housekeeping notes. If you run into any technical issues, you can use that chat function at the bottom of your window for assistance. Additionally, please use the Q&A function to ask our speaker any questions. So again, it's the chat function for technical issues and the Q&A function for asking questions of today's speaker. There'll be plenty of time for questions. Now, the number one most asked question during a webinar is, will we get the webinar recording? And the answer to that question is within 24 to 48 hours, you will receive an email with the session recording, slides, bonus materials, and a survey about today's session. Please take a moment to complete the survey as your feedback greatly helps us in programming future events. So be on the lookout for that. Now let's get started. As internal communicators shift their focus in 2025, it's valuable to reflect on the successes and challenges of 2024. Reviewing both your wins and setbacks from the year will provide crucial insights to help forecast and shape the evolving internal communications landscape in the year ahead. To that end, Polite Mail surveyed over 200 communicators on their successes and what they think will have the most profound impacts as we move forward. Today, I'm joined by Polite Mail's Melissa Katsky-Berry, who will share key findings of the annual survey and what it means for internal communicators. This analysis of internal comms across organizations will share insights that will guide your future internal messaging, what the data shows for emerging trends, and how to work with leadership to align your strategy with organizational goals. And now I'm happy to turn things over to Melissa.
Perfect. All right. So as John noted, today I'm going to discuss the major trends for internal communications in 2025. The data that I'm going to present is from a poll of over 200 communicators where we asked, what were your successes in 2024 and how can we use that to inform best practices of 2025? The survey participants come from a variety of organizations to prevent one size from putting undue weight on the results. So, for example, about 20% of respondents come from organizations with fewer than 500 employees, and then around the same amount come from organizations with more than 10,000 individuals. And most survey respondents come from organizations with employees based in just one country, but just under half, so 43%, work at businesses that have employees in multiple countries. So we're working with global businesses as well. And most of these companies are business to business or both business to business and business to consumer. In the survey, we asked the open-ended question, what were your success stories in 2024? And here are some of the responses. So the answers point to improving the quality of intranets, shortening up messaging, using measurement tools and organizing content, and optimizing channels. Channel audits and streamlining channels are hot topics right now, so you may want to incorporate this into your 2025 plans. The importance of measurement is another good topic to look into. I don't think the importance of that ever goes away. And these answers go along with a lot of trends we saw last year, including channel audits, again, reducing email overload and incorporating AI. And if anyone would like to share their successes from 2024, please feel free to put those in the Q&A section, and we'll go over them when we get to kind of the questions section at the end if you'd like. So now I'm going to go through the biggest communication trends for 2025 in more detail. Our first major trend is solving information overload. So in the survey, we asked respondents what their top 3 goals were for 2025, and 43% of respondents said this was a top priority. We all have access to so much information these days, and our attention spans keep decreasing. And your employees are bombarded with messages across a lot of different channels, which can lead to disengagement and cause employees to miss important updates. So as communicators, we need to figure out how to capture our audience's attention and give the appropriate amount of content to make sure that they consume it. Employees just don't have the bandwidth to consume most of the content that's distributed by their employers, so we need to make it count. We'll be dropping a link in the chat to our benchmark report and best practices guide. These reports will help you with solving information overload. We release these reports annually. The benchmark report analyzes data from over 4 billion internal emails to over 15 million global employees. So there's a lot of data taken into account with this report. And it's broken down by industry and distribution size, so you can compare how your internal emails stack up against similar companies. We then take all of that benchmark data and determine best practices for sending internal emails. And I'm going to go through some of these best practices next that will help you with reducing information overload for your employees. So our first best practice is to send to smaller, more targeted audiences. In these charts, the bars are email volume and the lines are the metrics rates. So we're looking at attention rate, readership, and click-through rate. You see higher attention and click-through rate when your lists are smaller. You also see higher readership when lists are smaller, but there is kind of a noticeable increase in that readership line chart in the 50 or 30 to 50,000 list size. And this is likely because we have a lot of clients in that company size range that have invested in their list accuracy, using polite mail tools to bring in HR data to clean up lists. And the fastest way to boost your open rates is to clean up your lists, because most organizations will either have old employees on lists, conference rooms on those lists, new employees might not even be on the list yet, and that would affect your total sent denominator. So the more tightly you can focus your communications to a specific audience, the better your results will be. That way, that audience is only receiving the information that's relevant to them. So a question we get a lot is, how would you make a message for all employees more targeted? There's always an opportunity to focus those messages by region or department. And you can do little changes such as changing the subject line or the call to action within the email, just tuning the message to be a little more relevant to specific groups, and then sending it to those smaller subsets of groups should improve performance. Another best practice to reduce information overload is sending from more specific email addresses. So in the report, we looked at what type of from address does the audience pay attention to. And in this chart, we're looking at the to from combination sent from a specific address to a specific audience. And this chart shows that most communicators are sending from a mailbox overwhelmingly, right? So you'll see that when messages are sent from a person that isn't the communicator's name, which is that self option at the end, you get a 7% increase in attention. And this is likely because those messages are coming from leadership names, so that gets the audience's attention. And then we also broke out our analysis by frequency and found that with the same to from combinations, sending more than once per week is the most common, but we saw better performance on less frequent emails. So you lose about 2% of readership every time you increase your frequency. And anytime you can send from a person, the data shows that you'll get a better results. So if you do, need to use a generic email address, the key is to have multiple, more than one message coming per week from the same from to address does not perform as well. And typically, that means that all of those messages are sent from a generic corporate communications at email address, and everything is being sent under that one address. So the way that you could improve your readership and attention while still using a generic mailbox name is to name the newsletter name. So this would reduce the frequency from that address and increase the attention and readership given to those messages. Another best practice is to keep your subject line to 6 words or less. Subject lines are another key to what people pay attention to. Nowadays, for most modern email clients, whether you're in Outlook or on mobile, subject lines are getting cut off somewhere between 40 to 50 characters. So that fits in with the front line of this chart. And then as you get to 7 to 8 words, subject lines start getting cut off. So if you can keep them below that, you'll have higher attention rate. And the top 20% email subjects from our benchmark report include keywords such as update, action, reminder, new, now, and news. These are just more attention grabbing words for your subject line. And we do have an AI subject line suggester that can help with determining the best subject line. That is a feature within Polite Mail, and that leads us to our next trend for 2025, which is embracing generative AI. So 20% of respondents said that they plan to leverage AI in meaningful ways this year. I know this is a topic that's on a lot of internal communicators' minds. How will AI affect internal communications in the future? Almost half of our respondents who have used AI for their communications said that it has helped them be more productive. But when using the AI, the emphasis should be on quality versus quantity. So, research by Gartner predicts that by 2025, low trust in AI generated content will reduce customer engagement by 50%, driving new urgency that makes engagement the top indicator of performance. As a consumer, you're getting inundated with automated AI generated messaging throughout your day. So you may start tuning those out. And the same goes for your employees. So it's really important to have tools that measure engagement rather than just open and click through rate. You need to know that your audience is actually reading the content that you're sending out. And if you don't have a tool that's measuring employee engagement, you may want to invest in one like Polite Mail, and also incorporating the best practices I talked about earlier and the additional best practices that you can find in our guide can help improve your messaging and increase your email engagement. Because despite all the hype around AI generated content and email becoming obsolete, email is still the number one communications channel. And this is my other favorite prediction from the Gartner report because I know a lot of people have concerns about AI taking away their job. But no matter how good AI is, it will never replace human creativity and ingenuity. So, more so, think of AI as another tool in your toolkit along with these data back best practices. And if you'd like to learn 100 Gartner predictions through 2030, we'll be dropping the link in the chat as well. This report includes predictions for how internal communications and data analytics will change in the next 5 years, so it can be helpful for future planning. Now, here are some ideas for productive ways to use AI as internal communicators. Summarizing content. So rather than spending hours reading the content, AI can create a one-page summary with the key points. Then you can dive into any points more in depth if needed. Writing and editing. AI can help write your intranet or social posts, your newsletter content, your blogs, and more. It can also help you reduce content that you've written or improve the reading ease score to make your content easier to digest. And that actually goes hand in hand with one of our email best practices, which is to keep messages easy to read or at around a fourth grade reading level. So we've seen that email read rates increase significantly with easy to read emails. AI can help you maintain a consistent brand voice. So it can help edit content so it aligns with your company's brand voice, especially if a piece has multiple writers contributing to it. Research compilation, AI can help you research topics and answer your questions. Visual content production, AI can produce images and video trailers from existing content. And language translation, AI can provide word, sentence, and entire document translations for you. And this is also a function that we have in Polite Mail, using AI to translate your email communications easily into another language. Another major trend we're seeing is the desire to optimize your communication channels. Communicators are trending towards streamlining communication channels. However, we're hearing that a pain point is that leadership is trying to add more. And the problem with multiple different channels for communications is that no one option is guaranteed to reach everyone. And because of this, some communicators also plan to centralize their content into one location. What channels work best for your organization will also depend on your type of workforce. For example, do you have more desk employees or more employees in the field? So, what are overall the most effective communications channels to use? Based on survey results year after year, we find that email is still the number one channel for disseminating information to employees. And it's not just by a small margin either, as you can see on this chart here. And there's so many different communication platforms out there these days, especially in today's work from home culture. We have messaging apps, social networking tools, mobile apps, virtual events. It can all become a bit overwhelming. And in the world of Zoom meetings, Teams meetings, and Slack channels, we've seen that email still reigns supreme. Because with email, you know it will hit employees' inboxes and they can consume it on their own schedule. And more people view direct emails than other less direct digital channels. In this survey, intranet came in at second, and virtual company and team meetings or events at third. And these results are from a survey that we conducted in the beginning of 2024. And then this survey is the survey we did at the end of the year. So as you can see, email is still the number one channel. But it's interesting to note that meetings have moved up to the number 2, 3, and 4 slots, in person and virtual, respectively. We're finding that younger people like face to face interactions with management. So if you have a younger workforce, this is something to keep in mind. I think people are really craving the connection that meetings can provide and hearing directly from management rather than reading content on an intranet, which feels more impersonal. So speaking of intranet, that's actually dropped down to number 5, which is very interesting because it used to be very popular, number 2 in the beginning of 2024, and it's recently dropped in popularity. Some aren't finding intranet as useful anymore for internal comms, but we are seeing that people are using email to promote their intranet as an effective way to drive traffic there. So, how can you select the right communications channel for your company and audience? Some things to look at are accessibility. So, meet your employees where they are and consider what channels your employees use daily. It could be helpful to choose a channel that allows you to provide multiple formats so you can accommodate people who are neurodiverse, dyslexic, or visually impaired, for example. Consider learning and retention, as different people have different learning styles. So, again, use multiple formats when possible. Research shows that people learn more when they read text on paper than when they read on screen. And storytelling narratives make it easier for people to remember information. Quality and relevant visuals will also shorten processing time and aid in better comprehension. And look at timeliness. With dispersed team members and many working from home, timeliness is a huge factor to look at. When using email and tools like Teams, you can account for employees' different time zones and schedule messages to be delivered at a specific date and time that works for them. And this is another feature that PoliteMail has to automate time zone sending for your emails. You should also look at the specific content you're sending when determining what channels to use. Email is great for news, announcements, event invites, business strategy and results like earnings announcements, operational updates, and reminders. Intranet is good for long form documents, so more detailed news stories, lengthy process and policy updates, and records of benefits like PTO. The trouble that we see is when companies misuse email as essentially an intranet by sending too much content and too many topics per message into that channel. Or the inverse, as a response to email overload complaints, a company may stop sending email and just post things on the intranet and then wonder why no one seems informed anymore. So each channel has a specific use. Meetings and chats are good for real time collaborative work or presentation of business strategy, results, and operation process. Communications that require more nuance and depth than you could provide via email. If your goal is to move towards more collaborative meetings in 2025, here are some best practices that might help. Choose the right time of day. Most people don't want to have a meeting on a Friday afternoon and are less likely to be engaged then. Establish meeting goals and an agenda so you aren't just winging it and having personal conversations, which are a nice part of having meetings, but they shouldn't take up the whole meeting. This can help keep everything on topic. Schedule shorter meetings. So, again, attention spans are decreasing, and a meeting that's multiple hours long won't be as productive as multiple shorter meetings. Encourage active participation without being pushy. There are always a few people who prefer to stay quiet during meetings, but you could gently draw them into the conversation and ask for their input. Share the meeting notes with attendees so they can refer back to them as needed. Solicit feedback after the meeting, any agenda topics people would like to add, for example, and start and end on time to respect everyone's schedule. Our next trend for 2025 is improving leadership communications, with 46% of respondents stating this as a goal. Leadership often has their own priorities and may not see how organization wide communication can help achieve the company goals, such as increased revenue and reduced turnover. So it's your job to make them understand how it does. The goal is to get executives and managers to engage in communication platforms, because if they aren't engaging, it gives employees permission to not engage as well. If leaders provide buy in, employees are more apt to be involved. And one way to get leadership buy in is to provide them with data showing the impact of internal communication initiatives. So, benchmarking your internal comms with a tool like Polite Mail can show successes and areas for improvement. Simplifying the process will also help your leaders engage in the initiatives. To do this, first establish a routine. So carve out time to implement the communication program, then review the results before moving on to the next project. More transparency will help it be more successful. Use page templates. Make it easy for leaders to accomplish tasks by providing email and intranet page templates so they can just fill in the specific sections. Use video scripts, put together outlines and clear talking points for leaders to deliver to employees via video, or take snippets of meetings to deliver the key messages and drive traffic to watching the full presentation. And use LinkedIn posts. So draft LinkedIn posts for leaders to share company news or reflections. You could also schedule a short Q&A with the leader to gather the information, then put together a draft post for them to review and approve. Here's some best practices for your leadership communications. First, foster a culture of communication. So, a video message or a CEO email shouldn't be done once in a while, once in a quarter. This should be a key value in the organization, so everyone will be more willing to listen and engage. Don't be afraid of training. Training programs for employees should be mandatory so that everyone has the necessary skills to fulfill their communication responsibilities. The executive should be required to take training as well. Have a common goal in mind. Executives should make the goal apparent so that everyone in the organization is working effectively together. Speak in your own voice. So, this is a case for not using AI. Employees want to hear from a real person. So, don't use canned responses or anything written that doesn't fit with the leader's unique voice. Engage in dialogue. Communication doesn't end with one email or post, it's a two-way street. So, results should be published, and employees need to see that they're being followed through with or reevaluated if necessary. Measure your results. The right type of metrics can transform your communications from a necessity to check a box to a valuable employee engagement mechanism. Measurement shows what's working and what isn't, so you can put together an information strategy and know which channels to use for what messages. Trend number 5 is a big one, and that is measuring your results across different channels. So, as we just discussed, measurement shows how successful your communications are. If you don't have a way to measure it, you can't fully know the effectiveness of your communications. When it comes to which KPIs to measure, here's what respondents had to say. Email open rates come in at the top of the list. Not surprisingly, as email is the #1 channel for internal communications. You need to see if all of the hard work that you're putting into creating and sending content is paying off, or if you need to reevaluate your strategy. Click-through rates come in at #4, which go hand in hand with email open rates. You want to see how much of your web traffic is being driven by the content in your email campaigns. Survey responses came in at a close second. This goes back to making sure employees are buying into your communications, which should be driven by leadership. You want to make sure that employees are actually responding to the surveys that you're sending out to solicit feedback. And although email open rates came through at #1, we believe there are some metrics that are more effective at measuring employee engagement. Click-through rate will show you how effective the calls to action within your messages are. This can also help you see what content is the most relevant to your employees and improve messages based on these results. Employee feedback collects qualitative data to better understand your employees' perceptions, concerns, and get suggestions. Intranet page views show how many people have visited intranet content, which may be more long form than what's in your emails. This can be combined with click-through rate to see if employees are following calls to action. And read time or time on page measures how much of the content recipients are reading. This is important because open rate will just show you if the content of the message has been displayed for any amount of time. But read time measurement will show you how many of those people who opened the message actually read the content. And then you can use this data to optimize content length and topics. Read time and attention rates are two of the key metrics that Polite Mail measures. Attention rate goes beyond the open rate and captures who paid attention to the email or who didn't. And this metric looks at how many people opened the message and then at least skimmed the content so they got past the subject line and into the body of the email. To effectively use data, you need to improve the way that it's collected. So, a work policy or practice may improve or diminish the employee experience, productivity, or well being of employees. But most organizations have no idea because they're relying on limited data sets, such as the annual employee survey, which by its name is only done once a year. And you need to be constantly collecting and evaluating the data. Engaged and happy employees are the lifeblood of a successful organization. So it's critical to actively solicit their feedback and demonstrate that it's being applied so they know they're being heard. Gathering the feedback should be utilized and presented in a way that improve employees' experience without feeling intrusive or oppressive. Leadership must also understand what employees say and, more importantly, have ways to measure and implement changes to reach organizational goals. So you have to take a product manager approach to this information. Every piece of data you get from employees should go into the employee experience roadmap. For example, companies like AstraZeneca and Schneider Electric have EX product teams that look at all employee journeys in detail, and they use survey data to improve the process continuously. And our last trend for 2025 is leveraging data analytics for your communication strategy. So, first, let's look at what a communication strategy is. A communication strategy defines who owns what, when to send, and how, establishes what KPIs to use, outlines how to segment your audience, specifies which channels to use when, and ties into your company initiatives. Make your measurement strategy actionable. So think about what you can do with the data once you gather it. In the discover phase, you have to take a look at what you've learned. What previously unknown problem areas have you uncovered? How many people are impacted? Is the issue leading to high degrees of negative sentiment and emotion? So you should perform a gap analysis to determine why the gap has occurred and how to overcome it. And analyze employee data holistically so you aren't missing anything. The next step is to prioritize the data you've collected. You can't do everything all at once. So, what needs the most attention? Prioritize things like investments, key stakeholders, and low effort, high impact interventions. What will be the value perceived by those impacted by your interventions? And develop goals to measure your actions. And then act based on the insights you've gathered, whether it's policy decisions, features and applications, reallocation of resources, et cetera. The opportunity to learn from your employees is everywhere. And not only do different groups have different needs, they often bring suggestions that you didn't consider. So, an example is a large pharma company told us that their employees' surveys pointed out how slow moving and bureaucratic their committee structure was to decision making. The company had used global committees for decades. And then during the pandemic, they canceled all the committees, and employees were immediately thrilled by their ability to get things done without going through that kind of bureaucratic step. And the result was that this long held cultural belief in committees was debunked, and they did away with the whole process. And finally, evaluate the changes that have been made. Were the initiatives you put in place valuable? Did behaviors change as anticipated? Did employees provide positive feedback about the changes? This is a continuous process, so you should be moving through the discover, prioritize, act, and evaluate stages as you get more data. To close this out, we've talked about the top 6 trends for 2025 as evidenced by our survey. Here are some of the additional responses from Reagan participants on what they think the biggest trends will be for 2025. CEO and leadership buy-in is huge, as well as measurement, which aligns with our trends we discussed earlier. There's also emphasis on improving work culture for employees and storytelling for employee engagement. This can be done with the email best practices that we discussed earlier. So I hope this helps you prepare your communication strategies for the upcoming year. And now we'll open it up to any questions that you all have.
Thank you, Melissa. Again, if you have any questions for today's speaker, use the Q&A function to submit your question. Any questions that we don't get to today will be handed off to the team for follow-up. So first question, can you talk about some other ways to reduce information overload in emails?
Yeah, so a lot of it is about keeping it short. So I talked a little bit earlier about, not using email like an intranet to post, long form stories. So we found that best practice is to keep the message length short and under 250 words. So you could do this by including a sentence or two about each topic or story, and then linking out to the long form content that's posted on the intranet. Hand in hand with keeping word length short is to also include less links within the email. So if you can kind of minimize the amount of stories that you need to share in each email, that will help as well with reducing information overload and improving your readership.
One participant was asking if you could share the survey size again with the group.
The survey slides, yes.
Size.
Oh, survey size, sorry,
Yes.
200 participants.
Nice. Another question, notice that email newsletters get lower readership than email. So does that mean standalone one-topic messages are more effective than putting a message in a company newsletter?
Yes, that's exactly what that means. So shorter one topic emails will get much higher readership than if that topic is kind of, for lack of a better term, hidden in your newsletter that has maybe 5 to 10 different topics.
Barbara asks, is there a preferred day of the week for sending mass emails?
Yeah, so we've found historically beginning of the week works best for sending out emails, um, either Monday or Tuesday, and then earlier in the day as well, so that you're catching people before lunch. You're not sending it in the afternoon when some people may, get off work early or just have shorter working hours. And I know it can be hard for communicators to send their emails out earlier in the week because a lot of times you're gathering stories from other departments that you want to put in the newsletter. So we do see that a lot of our clients will send their newsletters on like a Thursday. But if you can keep it to earlier in the week, maybe even doing stories from the previous week on Monday or Tuesday, that will get better readership.
You said internet channel is now less effective at reaching audiences. Are you saying that the old trend of trying to train team members to proactively go to a web page to see what's new versus sending it to them is now finally a thing of the past?
I mean, it jumped down from 2 to 5. So that tells me, the trend is probably going to keep continuing. I bet next time we do the survey, it'll drop down even lower. Because yes, especially with like the instant gratification these days of like a lot of chat channels as well. Um, People just aren't going to the internet as much unless they have it as their home screen. On when they open up the internet. But a lot of people don't have it set up like that, and even then, they'll usually just navigate away from it. So we're seeing that people are really just going to the internet if there's something very specific that they're looking for. They're not just going to the internet to like browse through stories. That would be better sent via email or even via a chat type channel.
So how do you storytell via email if you need to keep it short?
We've seen clients that will do, we used to work with Microsoft and they would do what they call popcorn style emails that were really successful. They actually sent them, I think it was either every day or every other day, but it just had one story in it, one image, a few sentences, and a link out to like the the larger, story that would be probably posted on the internet or just another web page. So really just like linking out, giving a really good image, like a candid shot of if it's a human interest story, a shot of like the person, that the story is about, something they're doing, rather than just like a stock image, and then linking to that story posted elsewhere in more long form.
Kind of going off of that, how about newsletter length? Any data on best length for a weekly newsletter?
Under 250 words, which is very short. I know whenever we present that data, um, people are like, I can't do that. So as close as you can get to 250 words, I'm definitely under 500 words. Once you get over 500 words, you see the readership just, plummet.
Do you have any thoughts on reaching non-wired employees with limited access to email and other traditional channels? How are you reaching those individuals?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We do have some clients that we have a lot of hospitals that are clients, some manufacturing organizations. So they have a lot of non-desk employees. And what they'll do, it's kind of maybe a little old school, but they'll actually like print out the emails and put it in like a break room that everyone goes in. Or we've seen like the behind the bathroom stall door type of display used by our clients, but they'll just take the same content from the email, print it out nicely, and then make that accessible to those employees. There are also like mobile apps if those employees have company mobile devices, um, or like in-person meetings. Those are, really popular again these days. So that's another good way to gather everyone to give them updates.
Uh, Gina has put in, would a short video giving headlines for a newsletter be more effective than a newsletter email alone?
Yeah, we see a lot of success with video content as long as, like you said, it's short. So it gives like kind of the key points, or it like links out to the longer video, posted elsewhere. But if it's like a video from leadership, like a CEO message in a video, our clients see a lot of success with that.
Um, Hillary's asking, what if your newsletters get higher read rates? How do you transfer that over to shorter messages?
Hmm, That's a good question. You could break it out into multiple of the same, the same content, but just break that newsletter out into multiple emails and see how that um, improves or changes performance. Or it might be that your newsletter is a good length for your audience. So the benchmark data is, overall what we found to be like the best practices. But that's across a lot of different organizations, and not every organization is going to, have the same employee behavior. So if it's kind of a cultural ingrained thing that everyone reads the newsletter, it might not really matter for you how long your newsletter is if people are reading it. So that's why it's important to have your own measurement data so that you can set your own benchmarks. You can see what your newsletter gets as it is now, as far as readership. And then you could try to make some changes and see how that affects the readership.
So for newsletter subject lines, do you recommend that you put the name of the newsletter in the subject line? Because if a subject line is only 6 words or less, the newsletter name may take up most or all of those 6 words. Any suggestions there?
Yeah. Y- no, actually, we don't. We recommend putting the newsletter name as the from address. So that way you can accomplish, that the audience knows what what's coming to them is that specific newsletter. But then the subject line should be, a little few words about the topic, or the most like important story in that newsletter.
Here's a great question. Any observations or tips about covering all hands meetings?
Oh yeah. So, definitely make sure that, you're communicating to employees on kind of a regular cadence about those all hands meetings. And then also, making sure it's coming from leadership. So you'll see better success. Like if you're sending out an email for the all hands meeting and it's from HR@politemail.com versus the CEO's name at politemail.com. If the CEO is actually sending it out themselves, or the communicator is sending it as the CEO rather than a generic mailbox, that invite, that meeting is going to get more attendance.
Did you do any measurement on the impact of including visuals in your emails, meaning photos or infographics?
Yes. Yep. We have that in our best practices guide and our benchmark report. But the general best practice is to include more images in the body of the email, but include words at the beginning of the email. So, for example, a lot of customers of ours will have like their banner header image as the first thing in their newsletter. And that's taking up a lot of valuable real estate, especially when you're looking at an email in your inbox and you see in the preview pane, the from address, the subject line, and then the first few sentences, not sentences, but first few words of the email. So we recommend the beginning of the email should be text, whether it's just a few sentences saying what the message is about. And then the body of the image should be more images, or body of the email should be more images. So that way, once you've caught the audience's attention and you've got them to read the email, then they have nice visuals to kind of go along with those stories and keep them engaged.
Adrian says that noticed that video gets low visibility in the results that you shared from the survey, but I keep hearing in our field that we should be doing more video, less written messages. What's your opinion on that, and does it depend on what the message is?
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on your audience and what the message is. So if you have, let's say it's like a short video update, um, that would be great because again, people's attention spans are short. Um, but sometimes people don't want to leave the email to go and watch a video. So, if you can keep a good blurb in the email about the story as well. That gives people the option to do both. But I think it will depend a lot on your audience, and then also, again, what the video is about. If it's short, you probably get a lot more visibility from your audience on that video.
Natasha asks, so if you have less topics in an email, then that creates more email. Then there's a lot of timely info to communicate, and more emails in a week, meaning less readership or the risk of folks missing it if it's only on the intranet. It might be a debacle that many are facing in internal comms. What is the best in this case?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We have seen there is data on best frequency in our benchmark report. Um, it's gonna go over my head right now, but I believe it's like 1 or 2 emails per week is the ideal frequency. Um, and like I said, we're linking those reports. So double check my work there, and maybe our marketing team can check it while I'm talking and say the exact data that we found that's in that report. But it's definitely not like a monthly email. Um, if you could do like 1 or 2 a week, even 2 is good if you don't want to send like every single day. Every single day does work for some organizations, especially if most of their employees are at their desk and on their email all the time. But it also helps to establish a routine. So if your employees start to expect that, every day at 10 a.m., the news of the day announcement is going to arrive in their inbox, they're more likely to read it as well. So there's a lot of different factors. And like you said, it is kind of like a dilemma. Like, do I keep my message short and send more frequently, or do I make it a little longer and send less frequently? So again, that's something that you could test out to see which option works best for your specific audience.
Going back to the Microsoft popcorn style that you talked about a little bit ago, is that style more commonly used in emails or on social channels? And where would you think that it would receive more clicks?
They were actually using it via email when we were working with them, but I think it would be also great on social channels. Like if you have a Teams channel, um, that's a great place to put like little stories in there. Of course, when you're chatting on Teams, you're not going to send like a whole essay. You're just going to send one thing at a time. Um, and you can we do have a tool for teams to also measure like sentiment and what topics the audience is finding interesting on teams. So that's a way to kind of look at those stories and see what content the audience is interested in receiving via Teams. And then you can use that kind of hand in hand with your email metrics. And maybe you find that certain topics people want to hear about on Teams, certain topics people want to hear about via email. So you can use the data to evaluate that as well.
Sarah is wondering if you've seen a significant difference for engagement between bi-weekly versus monthly email newsletters, assuming all the other factors remain the same.
Yeah, definitely more engagement for bi-weekly. So if you could send, a little more frequently than monthly. Monthly is kind of like too spaced out, we found. And that's in our benchmark report as well.
Um, Jasmine says, I believe one of the slides you shared stated that sending messages too frequently affects engagement. Does that contradict the guidance that you're sharing about breaking newsletters into more frequent short form emails? I think it might have been similar to a question that was asked earlier too.
Yes. It it does a little bit. So there's kind of like a sweet spot to frequency. Um, and it's, you don't want to send, well, again, it depends on your organization. But like 2 emails a day, that's too much. But that slide also was referring to sending from the same from email address to the same list too often. So if you're sending like your news updates twice a day, and the from email address is like polite mail news updates, and it's going to the all employees list, and that's being sent out twice a day, every day. That's too much. You'll see less engagement. But if you're sending like your, polite mail news update, and then maybe your polite mail HR update, and then your, polite mail, I don't know, IT update, or different from addresses, slightly different topics. Um, and then you're sending that to a different list or still the all employee list. Then you'll get better engagement because you're not sending from the same from email address to the same list every time. And we do have a client, a large retailer that we work with, that during the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, they were sending out updates to their managers at their stores twice a day, every day, including on weekends. And they saw with the data that they got from Polite Mail that that was too much. People weren't reading the evening news update that they were sending. They also weren't reading it on weekends. So they cut it back to once a day still, but every day during the week in the morning. And they got much higher readership because of that.
Um, Another question. Our company has never used email for news. How would you make that change to email news if people aren't used to this kind of communication?
That's a really good question. I would be curious what that company uses for news. And kind of, did they have more desk employees or more non-desk employees? Um, because it may be that email is just, not the ideal channel for their employees. But if they really wanted to switch to email, I'm sure if employees um, are actually, on emails and not completely non-desk workers, that I would just probably do some sort of like campaign from leadership about the change that's going to be put in place. You expect, or you've gotten used to your stories, in this format. We're going to be sending them in this format now. Make sure it comes from leadership, so that leadership buy-in that we talked about earlier. And then give it some time to ramp up, because change is difficult for people, but give it a few months to see how that works, and of course be able to measure how that works as well.
Is there a difference in channel selection by age group or by role?
Yeah, so I may have touched on it a little bit earlier when we were talking about meetings, where the younger workforce is more interested in meetings, because they want that like face-to-face interaction, the ability to ask questions. Younger employees are also more interested in using like Teams chats and using reactions. Um, and so, they may not be as experienced at email, but email is very easy to adapt as the primary communications channel. So it's certainly something that you can, add in conjunction to those chats and those, in-person or video meetings. And then we've also seen, I've been talking about it a bit, about how like deskless or non-desk employees versus desk employees use different channels, especially with roles like manufacturing or healthcare. If they're not on email as much, they would need a good meeting structure at that organization. Or if like you're our company and you're, on the development or engineering team, you're more likely to be on chat channels all the time for your collaboration.
So Aaron says that I found that people love stories about people, and pics of real employees make a world of difference. Is there any data to support that?
Yes. Yep. You'll see in our best practices guide that that is one of our recommendations for imagery, is to make sure that it's not like a clip art or like a standard, image you found on the internet, that it's pictures of actual people. And the content matters as well. So we do have we have seen proof that storytelling and stories about human interest stories do get much higher engagement um, in email, especially.
Elizabeth says that you mentioned a fourth grade reading level for emails. Wow, that seems low. Can you expand on that point?
Yeah, I know it does seem very low. You can kind of test out what your standard reading ease is because Word has that functionality. I'm pretty sure everyone uses Word here. So just plug in like your newsletter content into Word and see what your typical newsletter content is as far as reading ease. Most people will do like a eighth to 10th grade reading level or grade level. And you can kind of make it a little easier to read without completely dumbing it down by playing around with like spacing in the email. So like more white space, shorter length of your sentences can help reduce that grade level as well. So you don't need to keep it like totally basic, but yeah, we found that fourth grade reading level is the ideal reading level. Um, that's not to say like some companies, like we work with a pharmaceutical company that it's like we can't send at a fourth grade reading level. Our employees won't like respect that communication. So again, know your audience. If you're sending to like scientists and engineers, you can probably send at a little bit of higher grade level and get better engagement that way.
Um, all the departments in the company sends out emails at different times during the month. One department is normally not able to influence while the other departments send out their emails. If employees receive several emails during the week from different departments, does this impact viewership or does it not make a difference because it's coming from different sources?
Um, if the content is relevant to that audience, then it shouldn't make too much of a difference. So, making sure that like the marketing department is sending, if it's information for the sales team, they're only sending that to the sales team. They're not sending it to all employees or, multiple different departments that it's not relevant for them. So it's okay if multiple departments are sending emails out kind of at the same times, as long as the topics are relevant to that specific audience they're sending to, and they're not just like, oh, I'm going to send it to all employees rather than targeting their lists, which is one of the best practices I talked about earlier. Just making sure that those lists are targeted and the information in the email is relevant to that audience.
We have time for one last question. Just a reminder to everybody, though, that any questions we didn't get to during our session today will be given to the team for follow-up. Last question is, can you use AI to inform your content strategy?
Yeah, so AI is only as good as the content it receives. I know we've all seen kind of those funny Google results from AI saying, things that sound kind of crazy. So rather than using it to completely write your stories, the communicator could provide the content and then AI could help optimize the word choice and the brand voice using pattern recognition. Um, and then again, I talked a little bit earlier about, like being able to evaluate um, the audience's reactions on Teams and other chat channels. So I think you can see benefits of AI in, looking at what topics employees are talking about most, and what topics they're excited about, and then you can use that information to write your content for your newsletters.
Well, that brings our time together today to a close. As a reminder to our audience, you will receive today's materials and a survey within 24 to 48 hours. Please take 2 minutes to fill out that survey and help us program future events. On behalf of Reagan Communications and Polite Mail, thank you for attending today's session and have a great rest of your day.